Time Walk with Me.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Time Walk with me. I am the Time Walker, therefore you are walking with me. Every time I look at this commander, I want to make a deck out of it, so I did. It's Lulu, Loyal Hollyphant. I'm not sure what a Hollyphant is. Hollyphant, I don't know. But Lulu is a loyal one. She is a 3/2 elephant angel that costs 3 generic and 1 white mana to cast. She can fly, which makes her look like a bit of a Dumbo, but what are you gonna do? At the beginning of your end step, if a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on each tapped creature you control and then untap them. You can also include a background in the command zone, and I picked Cultist of the Absolute. Part of the reason I picked this is because I like the idea of a happy little angel elephant being a dark cultist monster. The other reason is because it makes you sacrifice a creature at the beginning of your upkeep. I guess the normal thing to do would be to use blink and bounce effects on my own stuff to trigger Lulu, but I went dark this time. That's who I am. Dark and complicated. Fascinatingly so, in fact. A cool alternative might be a blue background with a lot of tapping creatures and blink effects. There are many ways for a permanent to leave the battlefield, but this is the way I chose to do it in this deck. Just to get the usual sections out of the way, I have 9 pieces of ramp, and since I'm too poor to maintain as many decks as I build, they are suboptimal. See the link to the deck list for details. If you're building this deck yourself, you would do well to make better choices than I did, unless you just want to play casual, low-power games with friends. The same is true with the lands I put in. You'll want to put in a good number of lands that tap for black or white, and maybe some utility lands. My personal incarnation of this deck doesn't stand or fall on the land choices I made. Maybe it would if I did a better job at it, but it is what it is. Since this deck is sacrifice themed, I included these 9 cards to aid in that activity. I actually put in 10, but I think one of them ended up in another category. I have sort of a rule of 10 where I put in 10 cards in each category of the deck that really makes it unique, so I have plenty of room to add stuff like ramp and interaction. So we got Lotus Ring. This was a lucky pull from a pack. I don't expect you to go out and buy one of these, but if you can, go for it. It's a cool card that makes a creature much bigger and turns into a lotus that you can sacrifice for 3 mana of any color. Ashnod's Altar. With this, you can sacrifice a creature at any time for 2 colorless mana. It's a very good card. Grafted War Gear. This makes a creature big, equips for free, and kills any creature it detaches from, even indestructible ones. Aaron, Benalia's Ruin. In exchange for a single creature's pathetic life, you can make all your creatures stronger. And since this ability taps Aaron, he'll be tapped when Lulu's ability goes off, giving it another +1/+1 counter and untapping it. Fallen Angel. This flying angel loves to eat your creatures and then smack your enemies in the face. Snack and smack. Phyrexian Dreadnought. One of the BFM's earrings, this trampling 12/12 monstrosity costs just 1 generic mana to cast and eats 12 or more power worth of creatures, or it dies. That means that if you need a cheap sack outlet, you can just cast this and immediately sacrifice it. It still counts as dying and leaving the battlefield too. It's a very expensive card, the most expensive one that I own in fact, so don't go buying this just because I put it in this deck. Unless you want to, of course. Just know that we can still be friends, even if you have to substitute it with something else. Treacherous Greed. Did one of your creatures accidentally survive combat and rob you of a death trigger? This card rectifies that situation by ridding you of the creature, giving you the death trigger, letting you draw 3 cards, giving you 3 life, and robbing each opponent of 3 life. That's potentially good value for 3 mana. Ruthless Lawbringer. This guy lets you sacrifice a creature to destroy target non-land permanent. Trade a 1/1 token for an opponent's Rhystic Study. You'll be the hero of the table. And Lich Knight's Conquest. If you have a lot of small token creatures and a full graveyard, you can swap them out and get your heavy hitters back. Minthara, Merciless Soul. Each time something of yours leaves the battlefield, Minthara becomes harder for your opponents to target, and she makes your creatures stronger and stronger. And that's going to happen at least once a turn once you have Lulu and her background out and a sustainable way to keep her sacrifices up. Otherwise you'll end up having to sacrifice Lulu, and that's not optimal. Tabarax, Hope's Demise. This friendly fellow gets bigger when another of your non-token creatures dies, and he especially likes to see clerics die. Senger, the Dark Baron. This flying vampire noble gets bigger when any creature dies, even if it's a token and even if it's one of your opponent's creatures. And if an opponent loses the game, you get whatever life they had as the turn began. Filigree Familiar. You draw a card when this dies. Neato. Butcher of Malakir. Whenever you sacrifice a creature, everyone else has to sacrifice one too. Vito, Fanatic of Aklazotz. A little hard to pronounce. This gives you a variety of benefits when you sacrifice creatures. The first time you do it during a turn, you get 2 life. The second time, each opponent loses 2 life. And the third time, you get a 4/3 flying black and white vampire demon token. Faramir, Field Commander. This guy lets you draw an extra card during your end step if one of your creatures died during your turn. The ring probably won't be tempting you too much, so its top ability is the only one that really matters here. Cathodion. When this guy dies, you get 3 colorless mana, and if you sacrificed him to Ashnod's Altar, that gives you a total of 5 colorless mana. Liliana's Standard Bearer. If you had a turn where you sacrificed a lot of stuff, this guy can go down with them and fill up your hand. Ao, the Dawn Sky. If you sacrifice this dragon, or if it dies some other way, you can get 4 mana worth of permanents onto the battlefield from the top 7 cards of your library, or you can put 2+1/+1 counters on each creature and vehicle you control. Junji, the Midnight Sky. When this guy dies, you get a non-dragon from any graveyard onto the battlefield under your control, or each opponent discards 2 cards and loses 2 life. And Teysa Orzhov Scion. This lady is great for when you have a lot of creature tokens, but her abilities work with non-token ones too. Sacrifice 3 white creatures to exile target creature, and whenever another black creature you control dies, you get a 1/1 flying white spirit token. Many of the cards from the previous category specify non-token creatures, but not all of them do, so I put in some cards to keep the cannon fodder flowing. Tetravis. I recently did a spotlight on this card. Tetravis lets you make a bunch of 1/1 flying Tetravites. The idea is that you'll end up sacrificing Tetravis once its counters have been turned into creatures and resurrecting it to make more Tetravites. Nomad's Assembly. This card ends up getting cast twice, so it doubles and then quadruples the number of creatures you control. Zat's Will. This could end up getting you a ton of 0/1 Thrall tokens, but if it doesn't, it at least permanently gets rid of some scary creatures and neutralizes your opponent's graveyards. Tevish Zat, Doom of Fools. This planeswalker creates 2 0/1 Thralls at a time, draws you cards, and potentially gains control of all the commanders as long as they're on the battlefield or in the command zone. Skursdag, High Priest. As long as a creature has died this turn, this creature taps itself down and 2 other creatures to make a 5/5 flying demon. It's really quite perfect for Lulu. Lena, Selfless Champion. When she enters the battlefield, this human knight gives you a 1/1 soldier token for every non-token creature you control. Denethor, Ruling Steward. Since a creature will be sacrificed every turn as long as Lulu is a cultist of the Absolute, the human noble will always give you a 1/1 human soldier token during your end step, which you can then later sacrifice to Lulu and trigger Denethor again. Boss's Chauffeur. This elf gets bigger and bigger as creatures enter and leave the battlefield, and then gives you a 0/1 green and white citizen for every +1/+1 counter on him when he dies. Increasing Devotion. This spell can give you a total of 15 1/1 human tokens when you cast it from your hand and then later from your graveyard. Sedgemoor Witch. The 1/1 pest tokens that you get from this human warlock whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell are great for sacrificing because they each give you 1 life when you do. Edgar, Charmed Groom / Edgar Markov's Coffin. Edgar is a good-sized creature who helps out your vampires, but he really fits into this deck when you sacrifice him, causing him to transform into a coffin that pumps out 1/1 black and white vampire tokens until it has made 3 of them. Then it transforms back into Edgar, who is ready to be sacrificed again. With all this sacrificing going on, I made sure to include ways of getting creatures back from my graveyard. Phyrexian Reclamation. For the low cost of 2 mana and 2 life, you can make sure your creatures never really die. Viconia Drow Apostate. During your upkeep, this guy gives you back a random creature from your graveyard as long as you have 4 or more of them in there. Oversold Cemetery. This does the same thing as Viconia, but it's an enchantment. Body Snatcher. If you have a big creature in your hand that you won't be able to cast anytime soon, you can use this to stick it in your graveyard and then sacrifice it to bring the creature out onto the battlefield. And Lurus of the Dream Den. This cat nightmare lets you cast 1 permanent spell with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard every turn. Legions to Ashes. This is great if an opponent has a bunch of tokens that are bothering you. Invoke the Divine. Murderous Compulsion and Royal Assassin. Both of these kill a tapped creature. One of them is a creature that does it by tapping and can be repeated thanks to Lulu's ability. Boombox. This versatile weapon of mass destruction can potentially destroy an artifact, a creature, and a land, or any 1 or 2 of them. Or none of them, I guess, but that would be a waste of 6 mana. And Disenchant. Transmogrant's Crown, or Transmogrant's Crown? Not sure how that's pronounced, but doesn't really matter. This is basically a budget alternative to Skull Clamp, but it has the advantage of not outright killing anything you put it on that has 1 toughness, so you can still sacrifice it to other spells and abilities. Arcane Encyclopedia. This is a sort of a placeholder for an artifact that draws you cards more efficiently, like Loreseeker's Stone. Manifold Key. This is here to make the heavy hitters in the deck unblockable. Skyclave Shade. This guy likes to come back from the graveyard, so he's good sacrifice material. Thieving Amalgam. This ape snake gives you plenty of your opponent's stuff to sacrifice. Introduction to Prophecy. There are cheaper draw spells, but I think 3 generic mana isn't too hard to scrape together. And Bolus's Citadel. This card rules and is quite expensive, but you might have a hard time not winning the game with it. So that's my Lulu Loyal Hollyphant / Cultist of the Absolute deck. Give me your thoughts and opinions. I don't get all that many at this point in this channel, so I do pay attention to all of them. I even read out the ones that I like to my girlfriend. So, I'll see you next time.